Welcome to Threads of Truth, a podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're going to walk through a truly puzzling case from 2008, the vanishing of Brandon Ashcraft, a young man whose life took an abrupt and, bewildering turn in Texas. This is a story woven from personal struggles, conflicting accounts, and a discovery that brought a tragic end to a hopeful search, yet left so many profound questions haunting a family and a community.
Yeah, it's really fascinating looking at the sources you've provided, how the whole narrative shifts. It starts looking like, a missing persons case, maybe straightforward, but then it morphs into something far more complex and unsolved homicide. And it really underscores the lasting impact these things have on the people left behind. We'll try to explore the layers of this mystery, from Brandon's very last known movements to the frankly frustrating inconsistencies that have kept this case from finding any real resolution for, over a decade now.
Exactly. And as we unpack the details you've laid out from those sources, you listening will get insight into Brandon's background, the really perplexing specifics around his abandoned car, and the ongoing, just tireless fight for answers that his family keeps waging. This isn't just us recounting facts, it's really an exploration of the crucial points, the twists and turns in trying to understand what happened here.
Brandon Ashcraft, A Life Interrupted.
Okay, so to start, let's try and understand the young man at the center of all this, based on the background info you've got. Who was Brandon Ashcraft?
Well, the sources paint a pretty clear picture. Brandon was 21 years old back then, a student living near Houston, Texas. And by all accounts, he was just incredibly grounded. People who knew him described him as kind, gentle, really reliable. This wasn't someone who was, drifting or unstable. He held steady jobs, lived at home with his parents, generally seen as a promising young guy, contributing, doing his thing.
Okay, so a solid foundation.
Very solid. Yeah. And what really stands out in the materials you've shared, and this becomes a huge sort of paradox for investigators, is how deeply rooted he was, especially with his family. He had really close ties to his parents, his siblings. Everyone described him as intensely family-oriented.
Right, and that's key, isn't it, in these kinds of cases?
It's absolutely critical, because when someone disappears without explanation, the first thing investigators look at is their patterns, their relationships. For someone so connected, so stable, his sudden vanishing without a word, without any trace, it isn't just confusing, it's deeply out of character. It immediately forces you to weigh two possibilities. Did he leave voluntarily, even if it seems illogical? Or did something else happen, foul play? Yeah. It blurs the path right from the start. This wasn't someone you'd expect to just disappear, which makes this case stand out and really deepens the mystery.
So based on everything you just walked us through, Brandon sounds like a really stable young man, firmly rooted. But your sources also mentioned that in the weeks just before November 2008, there might have been something else going on, some personal stuff that maybe indicated things weren't quite so stable.
That's exactly where the picture gets, significantly more complex, according to the details in your sources.
Yeah.
While he was generally stable, in those weeks right before he vanished, he was apparently under some pretty significant emotional strain.
Okay. What was causing that?
The main thing mentioned in the materials was a recent breakup with his girlfriend. And it seems like it wasn't just a casual thing. It hit him hard, really affected him deeply. And friends apparently noticed changes in his behavior around them. They described him as erratic sometimes, inconsistent.
Erratic how?
Well, sometimes he'd get really withdrawn and kind of pull into himself, which wasn't his usual style, given he was known as kind and gentle. But then other times he'd be restless, almost agitated, like he couldn't settle. Maybe a sign of some inner turmoil. And this personal struggle, this emotional difficulty, it's a really crucial detail. Investigators would have had to consider it right away. It might shed light on his mental state at the time, maybe point to vulnerabilities he had. Perhaps it made him more susceptible to external threats. Or maybe it made him prone to making impulsive choices he wouldn't normally make.
Right. That's a tough question for investigators.
Absolutely. How much did his own struggles influence his decisions in those last days? Did it lead him down a path he wouldn't have otherwise taken?
Yeah.
Or did being emotionally distressed make him, maybe inadvertently, a target? Less cautious, more easily manipulated. We know from other cases, emotional distress can seriously cloud your judgment. People make choices that seem completely illogical from the outside. It's a critical thread, trying to understand the context of his disappearance.
The day he vanished, a tangled web of accounts.
Okay, so we've got this picture. A normally stable young guy, but he's under considerable emotional stress. Then comes November 27th, 2008, Thanksgiving night. This is the day Brandon Ashcraft disappears. What do the materials you've shared actually tell us about his last known movements? How clear are those details, really?
This is exactly where the threads, the understanding of what happened start to really unravel. The sources document this pretty meticulously. The narrative gets really convoluted, very unclear right from this point. Brandon left his family's home pretty abruptly on Thanksgiving night. Details are thin, but what seems confirmed is he didn't really tell his family what his plans were.
Just walked out.
Pretty much. And significantly, he didn't seem to take much with him. No packed bag, no sign he was planning a trip or anything. That immediate, unexplained departure is a huge red flag.
Yeah, for sure.
The last confirmed sighting of him, according to your sources, is later that same Thanksgiving night. He was apparently seen with one friend, and supposedly he was on his way to meet another friend. But the abruptness of him leaving, combined with the lack of explanation, not even packing essentials or telling his close family, it's significant.
Was it just spontaneous, maybe driven by how he was feeling?
That's one possibility. A spur-of-the-moment thing, wanting to escape. Or was it part of some larger plan he just didn't share? We don't know. And that ambiguity right at the very start makes those initial moments so hard to interpret. It leaves a lot of room for speculation.
And your sources emphasize that these early accounts are, well, problematic. You mentioned conflicting details. Sounds like inconsistencies popped up right away, making it even harder to piece together that day.
Oh, absolutely. This is exactly where the case becomes, as your materials really underscore, just a tangled mess of unreliable information. Friends and acquaintances who were supposedly with him or saw him that day, they later gave really vague accounts. And worse, there were conflicting details about where he was going, who he was meeting.
So no clear timeline.
It became incredibly difficult for investigators to build a solid, coherent, undisputed timeline of those last few hours before he vanished. It's like trying to do a puzzle when half the pieces are missing and the other half don't quite seem to fit. And then there's the huge piece of the puzzle, his car. His black 2004 Chevy Impala. It was found abandoned in a Houston neighborhood, not hidden away, but accessible. And the condition it was found in was immediately suspicious, as your sources detail. It was unlocked.
Unlocked. That's strange.
Very strange, especially if you're leaving personal items inside. But the keys, they were gone, completely missing. And adding to the confusion, his wallet, his cell phone, other personal things he'd normally carry, also missing from the car.
Okay, wait. Unlocked car, but missing keys, missing wallet, and phone. That raises a ton of questions right there.
Exactly. Let's unpack that a bit based on what the materials suggest. If Brandon planned to leave voluntarily, right, to start fresh or just get away, why leave the car unlocked? But take your wallet and phone seems contradictory if you knew transport.
Right.
On the other hand, if it was a simple car theft gone wrong,
Right.
why would the thief leave the car, a 2004 Impala, not super old, and just take the keys and personal stuff? Usually they want the car itself.
So the missing keys are a big deal.
Huge. It implies the car was maybe taken by force and then dumped, or maybe Brandon himself left them behind in a rush, maybe under duress. It immediately suggests something way more complex than just running away or a simple theft. It points towards an incident, a struggle, maybe even a scene staged to mislead.
So why are all the details about his final day so inconsistent? And what does the car really tell us?
That's the million-dollar question. Were the inconsistencies just confusion, foggy memories, or something more deliberate? And the car, could he have just forgotten his stuff in his distress? Or was he somehow prevented from getting them? The car becomes the silent witness telling a very confusing story. It offers clues, but they're incredibly hard to interpret on their own.
The initial investigation and early theories.
Okay, so we have these really perplexing initial details. Brandon's emotional state, leaving abruptly, the conflicting stories from friends, and this very weird situation with his abandoned car. How did the investigation actually unfold from there? What were the first theories police were working with?
Well, right from the start, as your sources show, local law enforcement, helped by a lot of dedicated volunteers, and they launched a pretty extensive search, big scale. They were scouring nearby areas, hoping to find any trace of Brandon, any belongings, anything. They questioned acquaintances, chased down initial leads urgently, but frustratingly, those leads just dried up really fast. Within days, they were kind of hitting a wall without a clear direction.
So a tough case from day one.
Definitely. Lacked those immediate, obvious clues you sometimes get. So in those early stages, police considered a couple of main theories, which is pretty standard when there's no clear crime scene. One was, maybe it was a car theft gone wrong, maybe a confrontation escalated, leading to his abduction, or worse. The other main theory, especially given the lack of obvious struggle signs at the car, was a planned disappearance, maybe linked to that emotional distress he was feeling.
A planned disappearance. Even though we heard how close he was to his family, that must have been hard for them to hear.
Extremely hard. And this is where the family's perspective becomes so vital. Your sources make it really clear. Brandon's family and friends flat out rejected the planned disappearance theory. Vehemently, unequivocally.
They just didn't buy it.
Not for a second. They said with absolute certainty, knowing his character, his deep family ties, he would never leave without contacting them. It wasn't just a feeling, it was based on years of knowing him. His commitment to family was like a core part of who he was.
And did any evidence back them up? Or was it just their word against the theory?
Well, their intuition was pretty quickly supported by concrete evidence the investigators found. They checked his financial records, standard procedure, and there's absolutely zero activity on his bank account after he vanished. Nothing.
That's significant.
Hugely significant. And similarly, no activity on his social media accounts. Even back in 2008, for a young person starting over deliberately, that silence would be very unusual. So this lack of any financial or digital footprint, it powerfully backed up the family's stance. And it really shifted the investigation's focus toward a much darker theory. Foul play.
Because if you plan to start over, you need money.
Exactly. You almost always need access to your funds. The fact his account was never touched strongly suggests he was either incapacitated, somehow prevented from getting to his money, or perhaps maybe died very soon after he disappeared.
It raises that question, doesn't it? How much weight do you give the family's gut feeling versus initial police theories?
It's a constant tension in these cases. But here, the family's unwavering certainty, combined with that hard evidence of financial inactivity, became the driving force. It made the investigation pivot decisively towards exploring a potential crime.
The tragic discovery, a resolution, but not answers.
So the search for Brandon Ashcraft went cold. Over a year passed, leaving his family in just agonizing limbo, holding on to hope. But your sources say that in January 2010, things took a really significant, heartbreaking turn. What happened then?
Yeah, after more than a year of searching, of that constant worry and fragile hope, the case did take a devastating turn. January 2010, two teenagers were just out exploring, apparently, in a remote wooded area somewhere in the greater Houston vicinity, and they made a grim discovery.
Human remains.
Yes, human remains. It was a secluded spot, off the beaten path, enough so that it wasn't likely to be found quickly in those initial broader searches. The fact it took over a year tells you something about how remote it was, or maybe just the sheer scale of the area they had to cover earlier. Through careful work with dental records, the remains were later definitively identified as Brandon Ashcraft.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It brought a heartbreaking but definitive end to the family's search for him. For over a year, they'd clung to that possibility he might still be out there, alive. This discovery just shattered that hope.
And dental records. Sometimes that's all they have after that long, right?
Exactly. As your materials suggest, when remains have been exposed to the elements for a long time, things like fingerprints or even DNA can degrade significantly. Dental records, fillings, alignment, unique work, they're incredibly durable. Often they become the only way to get a positive ID. It was a critical breakthrough, but obviously one that brought immense sadness.
Okay, so they found him. But did they determine a cause of death? Did this discovery, as awful as it was, shed any light on how he died? Or did it just leave the family with a different kind of agonizing uncertainty?
Tragically, and this adds another layer of deep frustration to the case, a definitive cause of death for Brandon was never determined.
Never. Why not?
It was largely because of the condition of the remains when they were found. Over a year out in the elements, sun, rain, natural decay, maybe animal activity, it meant that a lot of the forensic evidence that might point to a specific cause of death was just gone or impossible to read. Soft tissues would have decomposed. Any superficial injuries might have vanished.
But they must have ruled something.
They did. The medical examiner's office, after a thorough examination of what they could analyze, made a critical ruling. They noted the remains were consistent with a homicide.
Consistent with, okay, so not proof, but strongly suggestive.
Exactly. It wasn't like finding a bullet or clear evidence of blunt force trauma, but based on everything, the skeletal evidence they had, the circumstances of the discovery in that remote place, ruling out natural causes or suicide, they concluded it pointed towards foul play. That ruling was huge because it shifted the focus entirely away from theories like a voluntary disappearance ending tragically or a simple accident. It firmly put Brandon's death into the category of a potential crime.
But without knowing how he died, that makes the investigation incredibly difficult, I imagine.
Incredibly difficult. It removes a key piece of the puzzle. You can't say, he died from X, so let's look for clues related to X. It leaves the door open for continued speculation about the specific circumstances. And it makes building a prosecutable case much, much harder. Think about investigating remains found like that time and nature can erase so many vital clues you might find at a fresher, more contained scene.
The ongoing mystery, unanswered questions, and a family's fight.
Okay, so Brandon's death is ruled consistent with a homicide. It confirms the family's worst fears, brings a terrible kind of end to the search for him. But despite that ruling, your sources confirm the case is still unsolved more than a decade on.
That's right. And that's really the enduring heartbreak here. Despite the ME's ruling pointing strongly to foul play, nobody has ever been arrested. No one has ever been charged in connection with Brandon Ashcraft's death. It's the very definition of a cold case, even with finding him and getting that homicide ruling.
So the foul play theory is the most likely, but not provable.
It's certainly the most plausible theory now, supported by where he was found at the ME's findings. But plausibility, as investigators know all too well, isn't enough to bring charges, let alone get a conviction. Without a confession, or a direct witness finally coming forward, or maybe some new forensic tech finding something on the remains, or a definitive cause of death providing specific leads, it's just impossible to conclusively prove what happened, and crucially, who did it. It really highlights how complex and frustrating these unsolved cases are. How does a case with a homicide ruling just go cold and stay cold for so long? It points to challenges like a muddled initial timeline, maybe uncooperative witnesses early on, and evidence lost to time and nature. The path to justice just gets completely obscured.
And your materials really emphasize the family's perseverance through all this. How have they coped? Particularly his mother, you mentioned. It must be an unimaginable weight to carry.
It truly is a parent's worst nightmare. And Brandon's family, especially his mother, they've just embodied this tireless, unwavering fight for justice. Your sources really convey that powerfully. They've refused to let Brandon's story just fade away, become another statistic, another cold case file gathering dust.
What have they been doing?
They've really harnessed the power of social media, other public platforms, to constantly keep his story alive. They campaign relentlessly for answers, share details, appeal to the public. Anyone who might know anything, no matter how small it seems, their dedication is, well, it's a powerful testament to a parent's love. And maybe that hope they held on to for so long, that hope he was alive, was shattered, but it was immediately replaced by this fierce determination. Find out who did this and why.
They must feel let down by the system.
Understandably, yes. There's a sense that maybe the system failed them, or at least hasn't provided the closure they desperately need. So they keep fighting, appealing for any scrap of information that might finally break the case open, bring some peace. Their resilience, their refusal to give up when facing such uncertainty and grief, it's truly remarkable. They've turned their private agony into this very public campaign for truth.
So bringing together all these complex threads we've walked through, Brandon's emotional state, those conflicting sightings, the really strange abandoned car situation, the agonizing year-long wait, and then the tragic discovery ruled as homicide. What are the core questions that still hang over this case? The ones that vex investigators, the family, and people like us trying to understand it from the outside based on your materials.
You've really hit on the core enigmas. The unanswered questions are exactly why Brandon's story remains such a haunting mystery, even with all the information you've gathered. First, fundamentally, that question of original intent. Did he really mean to leave voluntarily that Thanksgiving night, maybe pushed by his emotional state, or did he run into foul play almost immediately? While the evidence leans away from him just leaving, that initial confusion still clouds the timeline. When did the crime, if there was one, actually occur?
Right.
Second, if it was foul play, as the ME suggests, then who? Who would want to harm Brandon, and why? No clear motive has ever really surfaced publicly, at least not in your sources. That makes the who and the why incredibly elusive. It stops investigators from zooming in on specific suspects.
And there's conflicting stories.
Exactly. Third, why are the details about his final day so inconsistent? Were people confused, lying, protecting someone? Those conflicting accounts make building a reliable timeline almost impossible, and a solid timeline is often critical in homicide investigations. Opportunities get lost. Fourth, how much did his personal struggles, his mental state back then, influence his choices? Or, tragically, make him more vulnerable? Was he less cautious? Did he make a decision seeking escape or comfort that unintentionally put him in danger?
And the most chilling question, maybe.
Perhaps. Are there people out there who know more than they've told? Are critical pieces of this puzzle being deliberately withheld? Is someone holding on to a secret that could bring justice for Brandon and finally give his family the truth they deserve? These questions highlight the immense challenge when direct evidence is scarce, the timeline is fragmented, there are just too many gaps.
And why should we, the listeners, care about these unanswered questions?
Because I think they speak to something universal. The fragility of life. How danger can sometimes emerge from seemingly normal circumstances. And that fundamental human desire for justice, for truth, especially when a young life is cut short so mysteriously.
The enduring impact and unresolved threads.
The case of Brandon Ashcraft. Maybe it wasn't a huge national headline grabber compared to some others, but it's clearly left a deep mark on his community and on those who follow these unsolved mysteries, like the people using your sources. Yeah. What can we learn from cases like this about their lasting impact?
Well, an unsolved case like Brandon's, it becomes more than just a police file, doesn't it? It can weave itself into the fabric of a local community, becomes a local legend, maybe a source of ongoing fascination, but also, more importantly, a source of persistent grief and unanswered questions for decades. It really underscores the power of a single unresolved mystery to cast this long shadow. The fact that it wasn't maybe as widely covered nationally, paradoxically, might make its local impact feel even stronger, more concentrated. That collective community yearning for answers can be intense.
And the internet's role seems key here too.
Absolutely crucial, as your sources implicitly suggest, especially for cases that aren't constantly in the mainstream news. The internet, social media. These platforms have been vital in keeping Brandon's story alive. They give his family a place to share updates, advocate. They allow armchair detectives, concerned citizens, a place to discuss theories, share information. Sometimes, even years later, these discussions can spark a new look at old details, even if it's just speculation. Without that online persistence, many of these lesser-known cases might genuinely fade from public memory. Social media offers this continuous forum for advocacy and keeping the pressure on, which is a relatively modern aspect of dealing with cold cases.
Okay, so as we try to pull these threads together one last time, based on all the material you've walked us through, what are the core unresolved threads left hanging in this tragic story? What are we listening now left to really ponder?
The threads of truth, or maybe understanding, in Brandon Ashcraft's case. They really are tangled. It's a web of conflicting evidence, frustrating gaps. You've got that initial possibility, was it an accident? A voluntary departure ending tragically, maybe linked to his emotional state. That's one thread. But then you have the strong pull of the other thread, the medical examiner's ruling of homicide, demanding a criminal explanation. Then there's the car unlocked, keys gone, valuables missing. It screams something happened there. But there's a lack of other definitive clues from that scene. What exactly was that incident? It's this heartbreaking reality of a truth that, for now anyway, seems lost. Maybe concealed forever in that remote wooded area where he was found. The evidence is compelling in pieces, but ultimately incomplete.
So we're left with these possibilities.
Exactly. We're left asking, was Brandon the victim of a tragic accident that just looks suspicious afterwards? Maybe he succumbed to his distress out there. Or, as the ME suggests, was he murdered? Was it covered up, his body moved, the car staged? Or is there a third possibility? Did he initially choose to disappear, trying to escape his problems, only to meet some unknown fatal end out there later, a fate that silenced him forever? These are the questions that linger, that resonate. They remind us that sometimes, even with official rulings, the full story, the complete truth, remains agonizingly just out of reach. The death of Brandon Ashcraft remains this profound mystery. It's haunted a community for well over a decade now. You have a young man vanishing, his car found under really perplexing circumstances, and a family left enduring this lifetime of pain and uncertainty. The threads of understanding here are just so tangled, conflicting evidence, a grieving family's relentless fight, and a justice system that, at least from their perspective, hasn't delivered the final answers.
So, what do you think happened to Brandon Ashcraft? Do you lean towards the foul play theory based on what we've explored, or do you think another explanation might fit the scattered pieces? We genuinely like to hear your thoughts. Your insights genuinely help us all continue to seek answers. In our next episode, we turn to one of the most infamous missing persons cases in modern history, the 2007 disappearance of Madeleine McCann, a story that still grips the world nearly 2 decades later.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration of Brandon Ashcraft's case. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these unsolved cases and search for the truth one thread at a time.